welcome to the Bioenergetics of Mixed Martial Arts. I'm Dr. Jason Gillis. We've covered a lot in this course and you've learned a lot. You've learned a lot about the theory and you learned a lot about the practice. And in this, the final session, session 10, we want to put it all together and we're going to show you how to take everything we've learned up to now and develop endurance in mixed martial arts. Learning objectives for you. I want you to learn how to program your endurance training or someone else's endurance training across all phases of the fight plan that we learned about in the last lecture. And I also want to talk about how to create recovery workouts and warm-ups and cool-downs as well, because that's a really important part. This is what we're going to look at here. We're going to talk about how you develop in general endurance in MMA, and then we're going to program specific workouts for all phases of the fight plan that we mentioned: the general prep phase, the fight specific phase, the fight camp, the taper, the transition. And I'm going to give you those warm-ups and cool-downs. We're going to get really specific here. I'm going to give you exactly the workouts and tell you when to do them. Let's first start by talking about how you best develop endurance in mixed martial arts. On the left side of this figure, you're going to see this pyramid, and it really emphasizes that most of your time should be spent developing aerobic oxidation. And in the general prep phase, this is really the goal, especially if you're a beginner or an intermediate fighter. All your time should really be spent developing your aerobic energy systems, using those workouts that we talked about. And then as you move through your fight plan, as you get into the fight-specific preparation phase, then you should start to target more your glycolytic energy systems, first aerobic and then anaerobic. And then by the time you get into the fight camp, you should be targeting the ATP-PCR system. So here's an example of how you would program in the general preparatory phase using the principle that we just mentioned. So what we're looking at here on the top of the figure is the work to rest ratio, the work intervals, the rest intervals, the metabolic target, the example workout, and the phase of training. So you've seen all of this stuff before. You've seen this in previous lectures. But what I'm doing now is I'm adding on the exact phase of training when you should be actually using these things. So you've seen all the example workouts. I'm not going to really review these too much. You can pause the video and you can write those down if you like. I'm just going to be really focusing on the most striking characteristics here. So talking primarily about the work intervals and then talking about the phase of training. So you just start training in the beginning of your fight plan. In the early general preparatory phase, you should be really focusing on work intervals in around the 5-minute region. And as you move through the general preparatory phase, you should be slowly reducing the work interval. And so that's going to drop from 5 minutes to 4 minutes to 3 minutes to 2 minutes by the time you get to the end of the general preparatory phase. And what you're seeing there is a subtle shift. You're seeing intensity slowly increase, volume slowly decrease, and a shift in metabolic targets from purely oxidative to glycolytic. I want to give you an example of how you actually build these workouts into your fight plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about periodization here. Know that if you want to be taken through a step-by-step guide to building a 4-month, a 3-month, a 6-month, or a 12-month plan, then you're going to need to see that individual course offered also by the MMA Training Bible. But this is just a little overview of how we actually periodize those workouts into your fight plan. So on the bottom here, you're looking at training weeks, and there's 2 blocks of 4 training weeks here. And whenever you design a training plan, then you should be looking at the difficulty of your training week. So here, I categorize the difficulty starting with no training, moving from very low, low, medium, high, and very high training difficulty. And generally the way that you periodize is you should progressively increase the training difficulty over a period of weeks, and then you should always have a recovery week. This is Periodization 101. And then say in week 5, you bump it up a little bit and you start, rather than at a low level of training difficulty, you start a little bit higher, and then you progress from there up and up again. So now by week 7, you're training with a high training difficulty, but then you have a recovery week as well. So this is the general format for how you periodize a training plan. So let's say that your objectives for this first sub-phase is going to be oxidative energy system. So you're focusing on aerobic metabolism here and using 5-minute intervals. You'll take those previous workouts that I just showed you and you'll just start slotting them in. So here, 5-minute intervals, you'll put that in week 1. 2 sessions of 3 to 6 times, 5 minutes on, 2 minutes off. And then maybe in the next week, you'll do 2 sessions of 3 to 4 times, 5 minutes on, 1 minute off, 2-minute build up. So you're progressing in difficulty as the weeks go by. So here's 3 sessions of 3 to 4 times, 5 minutes on, 1 minute off, and 2-minute build up. And then let's show you how you progress from one subphase to the next. So now you're going to be in the next subphase focusing on 4-minute intervals. So here's an example of that training block just taken from the last slide. In week 5, you're going to do 2 sessions of 4 to 6 times 4 minutes on, 3 minutes off. And then you can see how we progress from week 6, 2 sessions of 3 to 4 times 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 2-minute build up. And then in week 7, 3 sessions of 3 to 4 times 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off with 2-minute build up. And then in weeks 4 and 8, those are recovery weeks. And you put in recovery workouts there that we're going to show you later. So this is just a little example of how you periodize. So let's get back to programming and giving you the workouts. Now, what you're going to see here as you start to enter the fight-specific phase, you should be shifting towards fight-specific activities as opposed to general activities. So more of these workouts will be done in training as opposed to just running on the road. Notice the work interval starts at around 2 minutes and then slowly drops to around 40 seconds. So what you're seeing at the beginning, the early phase of the fight-specific phase, you're doing like 2-minute intervals, and then that drops all the way to the very last one, the end of the fight-specific phase. You're doing around 40 to 60 second intervals. And the metabolic target is adjusting accordingly. At the beginning of this phase, your aerobic glycolytic and a little bit of phosphocreatine resynthesis. But at the bottom, at the end of the fight-specific phase, you're really focusing on primarily anaerobic glycolytic. So you're going to have a lot of lactate built up there. Now, I know a lot of people who train at gyms, they train with their teams and they do simulations of fights. At my old gym, we used to call it the fighter's drill. So you can sprinkle those wherever you like. Oftentimes, they happen on the weekends when all the fighters can get there. So an example, 2 to 7 times, 3 to 5 minutes on, 1 minute off, and oftentimes that's sparring or something like that. When you're in the fight camp, things change a little bit. So you're starting off with work intervals around 30 seconds or so, and as you move through the fight camp, the work interval drops 30 seconds to 15 to 20 seconds, 10 seconds, and then around 5 seconds or so is where you're finishing. And you can see the associated phase of training there, and the example workouts are all here, but in general, the metabolic target at the beginning of the fight camp, ATP PCR system, and then as you move through it, you're really still focusing on the ATP PCR system and building in other workouts, buffering. The big thing that's changing here, it's going to be the work to rest ratio. So you're seeing more rest as you move to the end of the fight camp, and you can incorporate the fighter's drill wherever you like. Now, by the time you get to the last 2 weeks of the fight camp, then it's really your objective to try to dissipate as much fatigue as possible. So I recommend that you really do these types of workouts in the last 2 weeks of the fight camp, which normally lasts 8 weeks. So you're looking at big work to rest ratios, 1 to 30, 1 to 45. The work interval is going to be around 30 seconds to 20 seconds to 5 to 6 seconds. And you can see the type of workouts that you'll incorporate as you move through the fight camp. But at this stage, it's all about starting to dissipate some of that accumulated fatigue that you've built up through your whole training plan. And then after you get through your fight camp, now you're moving into the taper. And the main purpose of the taper is really to start dissipating the fatigue. You're going to see a large drop in training volume, but you need to make sure that you're training with a high intensity. So you're going to see those same workouts again that feature this very large work to rest ratio, 1 to 30, 1 to 45, and 1 to 20 a little bit as well. And you're targeting the ATP PCR system, glycolytic enzymes. But like I said, the main point is to dissipate fatigue, and you can build these workouts in as shown on the far right hand side in the phase of training. You can also incorporate the fighter's drill, but maybe not near the end of the taper. Some fighters like to do it at the beginning of the taper, but I personally am not a fan of using this fighter's style drill in the taper because it can really build up a lot of fatigue, and it really can predispose you to injury as well. And then once you get into the transition, you've had your fight, the main objective here is really just to stay active. In the early phase of the transition, I recommend not doing any MMA specific activity at all, just playing games or sports that you used to, that you just find fun, basketball, squash, or whatever. But as you start to move through the transition and you're getting set up for that next fight plan, you really should add more structure to your workout, more whole body movements that start to focus on aerobic oxidation. And then you're right back to the beginning of the fight plan in the general prep phase where you're focusing on the aerobic energy system again. I wanted to give you a couple of recovery workouts here. You really should be incorporating recovery workouts at least every 4 weeks or so during those down times. The type of recovery workouts that you can do, again, is going to be non-contact, intermittent, high-intensity game sports, or you can do 10 to 20 minutes of general exercise, low intensity at 50% of your max heart rate. You're generally trying to keep it a low intensity. Another example is 2 to 4 times 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off with 1 minute build up, or 2 to 6 times 5 minutes on, 3 minutes off, 2 minute build up. You really want to make sure that you're at about 50% of your max heart rate though, and taking a lot of rest and stretching. Those recovery weeks are all about dissipating fatigue. Warm-ups, you should really choose warm-ups based upon the energy system that you're working. So if you're going to be doing an aerobic workout, then you want to, in your warm-up, maintain your heart rate at around 35% of your maximum until you start to sweat, and that should be fine. If you're going to be targeting a more high-intensity workout, anaerobic glycolytic, then you really want to increase your baseline oxygen use with really not too much fatigue. So 5 to 10 minutes at 70 to 80% of your max heart rate, and then recover for a little bit and then get into your workout. If you're focusing on ATP PCR system, you really want to increase muscle temperature, but you want to allow enough time to resynthesize phosphocreatine before the session starts. So a warm-up 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, 5 to 10 minutes with about 5 minutes of recovery is going to be appropriate, but just make sure you avoid explosive movements because that could deplete muscle glycogen and impair your performance in the workout. And here's some cool downs. I know not everybody likes to do cool downs, but I'm going to recommend that you do. So a good cool down, it will dissipate lactate and would help you recover. So 20 minutes, of light exercise at a pace that you're comfortable with. Whole body movement is preferable. So what we did in this session is I gave you the specific workouts in the order that I wanted you to do them in over the course of your whole fight plan. We covered the general prep and the fight specific period, and you should be doing aerobic glycolytic type workouts there. And then as you move through into the fight specific phase, the fight camp and the taper, you should be targeting the anaerobic glycolytic systems, the ATP PCR system, and generally as you get closer to that fight, you should be building in more rest and dissipating fatigue. And I showed you those other workouts that you're supposed to include during your recovery week as well. So I hope that you learned a couple things. Remember, you can always go back and pause the video and watch those slides again, and then write down the specific workouts and incorporate them into your own training. So I hope that you found this useful, and I hope that it helps you improve your performance. And we will see you in the next video course. Take care.